So I am very excited about today's conversation. I just said to Madeleine, I'm also scared because I know this is a subject I really care about and been trying to pursue becoming great as a leader. And I know also when I meet a lot of leaders, they ask me, how do I build this, great positive work culture that really make people want to be in the business, but also makes us stand out and give us that competitive edge out in the real world where we have to compete with other brands and not only the employees, but also the customers. So I'm very excited, Madeleine, that you said yes, because I was told that I should have a chat with you for over a long time. And I've been following you on LinkedIn. I know you were at Hawksmoor. I thought, okay, this is the time now, because there's been a couple of questions recently around, especially because the environment is quite tough out there right now. So how do you actually, start? There's more conversation around how do we actually build a culture to, retain your people, but also invite people to come and eat in your restaurant so you stand out when they go and spend their penny. And lots of leaders I got closer to the answer is a great culture. So thank you for coming on the show, Madeleine, and sharing your journey and some of the amazing insights you've learned on this.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here, Michael, and looking forward to our conversation.
So I already opened the show a bit with saying that, you had a past in Hawksmoor in hospitality, but you have a really interesting journey. Could you share for a bit of context before we dive into how we create positive work culture, more about what is your journey and what led you up to go and actually consult and coach leaders in how to build great workplaces?
Yeah. So I, first of all, I would say from the age of about 3, earliest memories, I was always a very greedy person and very into food. And all my memories from my childhood are about food, eating out. So I've always loved the world of hospitality. But my main career for about 15 years was actually being a teacher. I worked in London schools, teaching languages. And I always loved the kids sitting on the back row, the kind of T kids, the ones who didn't get on with school, the ones who didn't really care about verb conjugation. But I always had this natural feeling for them. And I eventually left teaching and took those skills over into hospitality, into learning and development. That was kind of how I transitioned. And when I got there, I discovered all those kids from the back of my classroom out in restaurants. And it was actually an amazing thing for me personally to see them maybe 5 years later in a work setting. And these people who maybe, and obviously I'm not talking about these same people, but those kind of that type, they were all there in hospitality, the back of the classroom kids. And all of a sudden, because I was in charge of learning and development, I discovered they loved learning. And they loved learning about food and drink and product and suppliers and hospitality. And it was just this real moment, I suppose, for me of seeing how amazing the hospitality industry is, how people's brains change and evolve, how strict structures are not right for everyone, but just seeing that everyone loves to learn and grow, essentially. And it really motivated me. So from that, I worked in the hospitality industry really with that kind of lens of learning and development. That led me to manager development. And that led me to really seeing how development and training is part of how you embed a culture. It is one tool. There are others, but it is one of the biggest tools. And that led me to dealing more widely with culture. And I was for 6 or 7 years with Hawksmoor as their head of culture, helping them really embed their culture as they went through a period of growth from being London-based to being national and then being transatlantic, international, and opening restaurants in New York. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell, age 3 to now.
And what was it that, you're going from a teacher into people function, L&D, head of culture. What was it that that made you want to do that shift? What was it that urged you? Because today you would argue two very hard disciplines, teaching, very hard discipline when I look at my kids in the school and the resources, they're under-resourced. And then hospitality, the similar kind of environment is also really tough. It has its great moment, but also has its struggle and is going through one of these periods right now. There's a lot of struggle in the industry. Well, what is that attracts you? Because for me, that seems like, challenging environment in each their way.
Yeah. I mean, very honestly, it was probably the pull factors of the hospitality industry and just my love for the final product. I mean, I love restaurants. I have always loved restaurants as a consumer. I've always, bought the newspapers, and the first place I go to is the restaurant review. So the whole of my life, that was in me. So yeah, there are challenges in the hospitality industry, but for me, it is a place of such joy, and it's doing what I love best, which is feeding people. And so it was just the pull from the true purpose of the industry, despite all those challenges.
Yeah, but it was very interesting because I've heard others as well. Is that also solving that complex journey and delivering not just a great plate of food, but the hospitality. So that's really the culture. The culture comes through on the plate, but also in the way it's served. Danny Meyer talks about, you have to, help, your people to deliver this extreme hospitality experience, not a service experience, but really that make other people feel something different than when they arrived. If they're in a bad mood, are they going to go away? And that's really a complex endeavor to do. And I think also that's some really what's driven me, and I can hear that often. That's why you're doing what you're doing. That's the purpose, because it is, as you say, it's challenging. But I also think after a little bit of experience, I don't know if you agree with that. There's also many industry is actually hard. If you want to be good at what you're doing, it's hard work.
Yeah. And it's hard and it's complex, but in a way for me, it's also extremely simple. It is just, and this makes it sound easy, but it's about really treating the people who work for you as you treat your guests. It really is about starting with that as your foundation point. And, hospitality comes from the Latin, so the word meaning guest. And hospitality is about treating people as guests, looking after guests. And the more we can think about our employees from that perspective, about how we want to make them feel, and really use that as our starting point. And really the foundation of that is just treating people well. That's where it all begins for me.
Yeah, and then it's interesting, and I believe I've always said to the leadership team I've been responsible, we have a moral obligation to make people feel great when they're at work. That's like one of our most important jobs, Yeah. We need to make money, but if we don't make our people feel great when they're at work, we're never going to make money. We're just going to be hunting the death spiral in a way. Can you talk a bit about, your philosophy around, what you see as, a great positive work culture and where you are coming from? What kind of lens are you taking on culture? Because there's lots of books. We talked about books before we went on. Lots of management theory, lots of great books about how to build great culture. But there is you have had some success with implementing things that's worked in a way in the practical world and also deliver on commercial results.
Yeah. I guess, I am a real back to basics person in some way. I've always been very drawn to pragmatism and things that make a tangible difference. So I think a great culture, we can all have all these huge ideas, but actually comes down very often, especially in hospitality, to those basics. Part of it actually is, what are the working conditions? Is my equipment working?
Really?
What's the maintenance like here? What happens if my oven's broken? I wouldn't tell you how many times I have worked with restaurants where that stuff is not in place. And in a way, there's no point having any highfalutin ideas before you've got these basics right. And I guess in that same family is things like, the rota. The rota is massive in hospitality. Yeah. And just that simple, but not always simple to deliver, but simple act of knowing your rota a week in advance, if possible 2 weeks, so you can plan a social life and a family life and perhaps your childcare These are they sound so small, but they are missing at times working equipment and a rota that you can predict a little bit. And getting those things in place for me is the first point. That's where I start. And it's just about what is someone's everyday experience of work like.
Yeah, and I think you're so spot on, because I think there was also, so I'm a very big fan, people know this on show, of good to great and the service profit chain. And there was like evidence on that, when the foundations are not in place, and the foundation is, you pay, your benefits, your contract, the machinery you use, the equipment you need to do a good job as a frontline employee. And then, your ability to know when to work and actually, plan your life. And that was one of the things I learned at McDonald's when we did a big survey. And what I learned later on in my career was that I think from an obligation point of view, we had to have 3 weeks. When we took that, went from 4, 5, and then 6-week advanced planning. And think, oh, why the hell would you do that? Because actually it all comes together in the end. Because actually that was the biggest, engagement factor I ever seen in any organization, was when we were able to help people plan their life. And you're so spot on. And that really reinforced that we were something special. We were very good at scheduling. We made it a skill. If you're a manager, yes, you have to be good at many things, but scheduling is one of the most important skills you need to manage. I know it's not about labor cost. It was about making sure people were working on times they want to work and can work. And actually, when you had a request, it was like a customer complaining about their food was cold. You just have to be on it straight away.
Absolutely. So we mustn't underestimate those foundational pieces, I think. And maybe some of your listeners are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Kind of at the bottom there are those basic needs for clutter, safety, security. And that's what we're talking about here. And of course, there are other needs that human beings yearn for and need, and that the workplace can provide. So if we go to the other end of the scale, in those hierarchy of needs, it's self-actualization. So kind of becoming a bigger and better human being is how I see that. And I think if workplaces can do that for people, that's also so powerful. So at the other end of the scale is, can I grow personally as well as professionally in this job?
Yeah.
And maybe it sounds a lot to deliver self-actualization for your employees, but in a way it's so simple. Like, is there a training program that doesn't just develop people's professional skills, but also develops them in ways that are going to impact their wider personal life? So, whether that is really good soft skills training, really good training about how to manage stress. These are things that people can take from work and use all over their life, and it helps them grow as a person. So if you can tap into that for people, you're also doing something really huge for your culture. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. You talked about these, you call them soft skills. I call them life skills sometimes, because they are so transferable in whatever people going to go and do. And if hospitality could be really recognized give people, because that's what I've seen, what has been invested in.
Yeah.
Learning how to be a better team player, how to communicate, how to listen. These skills are very difficult to change the longer you get into your career. But if you get them in early, as many young people are entering their first years, you are giving them, skills that's worth more than any degree they could go and get.
Absolutely. So that was, kind of what I was saying earlier in a way about one of the routes to embedding a culture is through your training. And, if we think about people's everyday experience at work alongside the equipment and the rota, the other thing that has a huge impact is your manager, your boss. Was, developing a really positive culture, at least, 25% of your focus needs to be on your managers and developing them with those, what you call life skills. Because once you give them the tools to communicate, listen, help people manage stress well themselves. Once you do that, they obviously have a huge trickle-down effect on the team.
Yeah.
Affect that team's everyday experience in a way that the CEO doesn't affect at all. They're too removed from it. But really, really investing in your managers and training them well with those skills, those life skills, soft skills. I think that is something very tangible you can do that has a huge impact on culture. And that's kind of what I do now in my freelance work. And that's why I really, enjoy and feel a sense of purpose about what I do, because I know it makes a difference. Having a good boss.
I think it's, I think there was a Gallup kind of book that was written. It was called "It's the Manager," and it was the managers talking about engagement and why people are leaving their job. It's connected to the manager. It was about, are you looking in the mirror? Are you looking out of the window? Kind of analogy as a manager. Are you actually facing the brutal fact? Exactly you. It's all about, and you need to train those skills to the soft skills. You need to do that. It was really interesting. You talk about, again, if we just summarize this, the foundation, has to be great work. You have to be able to get into a work environment where things work and you get your pay on time. Rota does work, and that's the foundational bit. Then you have your ability to be trained in your lives and soft skills, and then the quality of the manager. So it's the quality of those three areas in a way that combines a great culture. Is that correct? Understood?
Yeah, I think so. As we talk it through now, that's what feels right. Yeah.
And that's super simple. Could you then give a couple of examples on when that's done really well? Because what is that you are seeing? What is your experience? Because in an environment like that, it could be something you've seen on your journey or some great example, that they are actually delivering that and maintaining that. Because I think maintaining that is probably the biggest challenge. We'll come back to how you maintain that in a second. But
I think it is about really committing to, investing in manager development, investing in the right people to provide that, committing to and believing in time away from the day-to-day of work for your managers, because that is part of an investment. It's that time away from their job, which is just so valuable. That is where I've seen it really work, is when all of that is allowed. And actually very small, simple things. Again, if I was going to give some tips, is when I kind of design training programs as someone working within the hospitality industry, not a freelancer consulting like myself, I would commit to not sending my managers back into service when they had a training day. Because I knew that was part of my investment in them, was they were having a full day to do this. They weren't sat there in a session about listening, worrying about the fact that they had another 8-hour shift ahead of them later that day. And that sounds so small and simple, but that is rarely done, actually. So really investing and committing to it, really making it a priority, not suddenly pulling people off things because the urgent stuff, the here and now stuff means they can't attend something, and just making this a real priority for your business.
What is some of the, you mentioned a challenge there, again, it's a very simple challenge, but it's so real. You're trying to put more into a day than you actually can manage. How many people are effective after 6 hours of work? None, and especially when you use your brain. Can you talk about some of the common challenge you've seen in your journey in hospitality? You mentioned a couple of them. It's quite interesting. They're very, very simple challenges, I would say, but often, as you say, rightly overlooked. That really are, these challenges you see in companies that are really impacting there or blocking or giving constraints to become a great culture. They have all the intent, but as these basic things that's really in the way, they don't get them done properly.
Yeah. Well, I think it is, I suppose the most common thing I see is everyone getting just swept into the immediate, the urgent, without keeping some time for the less urgent but important stuff. And again, I imagine people maybe are familiar with the Eisenhower matrix, but this idea that work is divided into urgent stuff and important stuff. And the urgent stuff is right there in front of us. And hospitality is a very in your face, right here, right now kind of industry.
Yeah.
Service is by its nature got that kind of urgent feel to it. It is happening right now. We need to be here for it. And little emergencies come up in service and we're having to deal with them. So that's the kind of, I suppose, in the DNA of hospitality. And that's part of what people love about it. Yeah. It's this, it's immediate. There's an immediate gratification. You cook a meal, you serve it, people are immediately happy. So that's wonderful about the industry as well. But, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we have to do for a positive culture that is not urgent. And one of those is training and developing people and committing to that. Another is thinking about all the ways we engage people so that we retain them, giving people one-on-one time, for instance. That would be another thing. And in that whole category, that can all be lost when we get swept up into the urgent. And, I don't know, there's a leak in a building and everyone has to reroute to deal with that. And of course they do. But before we know it, all that important stuff is just being lost. So, if I was speaking to hospitality leaders, and a lot of my work with them is to prioritize the important as well as the urgent, and to really ring fence it. And you do have to, it's kind of a discipline. You have to set aside time each week to deal with it, to say no to all the other stuff, which is knocking on the door. And something very simple like, having like a 3-hour block each week in your diary on a set day where nothing is allowed to hijack you, where you are devoted to whatever your more important long-term tasks are. So important.
And it's quite interesting you talk about that, because what I've seen, I don't run a restaurant group right now, I'll be honest to say, but I'm building another company. But actually what I see in most places where I come in, I had a really good manager earlier, or a good leader early in my career that learned me about, the basic around time management from an early age. So my dad was quite, he had like gone on these time management courses. He came home at an early age and found out that it's like, you need to carve out your time for thinking and actually reflect on what's going well and what's not going so well. And I see that everywhere. And I see that people that's very experienced as well, they adjust like their calendar, and you look at that. How are you going to do your job? You just ask them, what do you mean? Your job description look like this. This is the outcome. That's not what's in your calendar. How are you going to do it? And it's like, and I think that's come from the urgency from the front line, comes with you into the management role. And therefore you will fail, or you will struggle at least.
Yeah, it really is in the DNA. I was, I'm thinking back to one of my clients. Of course, I won't name, but I work a lot with, top chefs, chef owners of really amazing restaurants. And one of my clients has a brilliant way with words, but they describe this image of, I shift sands. This is what I do in my job. I shift sands, because the work of a chef, and I don't want to downplay it. This person does a lot more than shifting sands. But in his words, his job is so tangible when he's in service that he takes something from here and he places it here. And that process is immediate and he sees it happen. And that's so much in the DNA of how he works. And as we rise up through hospitality, that's probably in our experience. So when you're leading, it is a mindset change of focusing on stuff that is not so tangible. And that isn't what always comes naturally to people. And actually, you mentioned thinking time. That's another thing I really encourage my clients to do, is to schedule in at least an hour a week of thinking time. And at the beginning, they're like, well, what do I do in that? But, you need to ring fence that time. And then you quickly begin to discover what it is you do in that. But you need that time stepping back.
Yeah, exactly. And I know how hard it is myself. There's a reason why I've been in food hospitality, all my life. It's because I find it hard to do that. And actually, what I do is I don't sit down and think. I go for a walk with no phone, no mute. There's nothing, no podcast. Just go for a walk. And often, if I can, somewhere there's beauty. And then the dust settles. Yeah. And it just works through. And it's not running, it's just walking.
Yeah.
In a reasonable pace. It's almost like my own board meeting. I still do that. I learned that 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful. And when things get, I can feel when things get really complex and moves fast, and I don't do this, that's when I start, my decision power just goes down, or really bad decision comes out, or no decision.
Yeah, if you want to make a good decision, take yourself for a walk. Absolutely. Especially hospitality people, they're not people who always want to sit and that they're moving people. There's lots of evidence about how our brains work, and our brains work best when we move. And there's a reason for that, which is we used to have to, in order to survive, hunt, and hunting involves movement. So our brains are hardwired to work really well when we're moving. That's when they need to work at their best. So that's quite often why you'll experience your best thinking when you're out walking.
Can you share some examples of companies, could be people you work with, or you've seen that like getting this, because culture in my view is that, unique altruism you build for your business. It's not like something you take a book down from the shelf and we're just going to follow this recipe like cooking a curry. It's not how it is. You need to really to find your own ways. You can get inspired what others do, but you really need to find your way. Can you share why you see some cultures are really good at what they do and behave consistently? Because I think that's really the hard. That there will be blobs of good leadership, but culture sustain in my way.
Yeah. So I'll answer both of those, maybe the consistency bit next. But I think in terms of, it's not a cookie cutter thing that you can just get from a book. It all begins with defining your unique strengths. And that's actually an incredibly hard question. So anyone who works with me, when I start with them, I ask them, what are your unique strengths? I ask them about 20 things, and that's one of them. And that is consistently the question that people are like, I don't know. I can't answer that. But I think you have to begin with, what is kind of unique and special about this place that you're creating? Because, culture partly begins a little bit organically, and each company, each restaurant, each group of people coming together, they have their own unique kind of climate that is formed. And if I think of some of the places I work with, sometimes that's this amazingly kind of cool, casual, joy-filled climate you walk into. In another place I work with, that's kind of a culture of like incredible excellence and integrity of the ingredients. But each place has something unique about it. And you really need to begin with defining that for yourself. And if you find that hard, the answer is just ask other people. Ask them what they see in you. They'll often have like a more accurate view than you. And I did this at scale in one company where we had all the guests and we had the old kind of mirrored glass. So we could see them, but they couldn't see us, like a focus group. And we listened to our guests talking about us and discovered, what do our guests see in us? And what from that is important for our culture, because that's what's really there, isn't it? It's not what we're dreaming up. It's what people actually seeing. So asking others, guests, employees, and just beginning it and then defining, what the real kind of 2 or 3 things, probably 3 things that really make you unique are. Those become your values. And that's the starting point. And then really it's about, working out, those are just values. They're just kind of ideas in the air. What is it we actually do day to day that brings these to life? And what don't we do? And really looking at the behaviors side of things. So culture is values plus behavior. That's one way I see it. But the behavior bit is really important. And in terms of consistency, I suppose it's then consistently role modeling, training, encouraging those behaviors, feeding back when they're not there, feeding back when they are there, and really consistently embedding them through the company, through your training, through your communications, through everything you do, so that you're seeing those behaviors come to life each day.
Yeah, and then behavior becomes, because that's often where it goes wrong. That's because the behaviors is what needs to be implemented often into your systems and so on. Can you give a couple of examples of when you've seen like, okay, it's not like that. By the way, that I think that was one of the most interesting aspects of learning what is your unique superpower. Because what you believe yourself sometimes can be true, but it could also be so another thing. And you about just delivered it by accident. You're unconscious delivering, but you're not utilizing, you're not scaling it. Because that's really what you need to scale. It's not number of restaurants, it's that story or that feeling, because that then become a number of successful restaurants. And you've been with Hawksmoor, it's a very great example of that. The Shum, I think, is another great example, and you can keep on mentioning places where they found out that super strength and actually live it out in the front line. Coming back to the behavior bit, what is that? How do you find out what the right behaviors is? How do I start? I guess we start with the values. These are the values you want to live out. Yeah. But how do we define what behaviors we want to see every day? What are the principle? What that's going to happen every day to boost that culture?
Well, I don't know. Let's make it a bit real with an example. So, say one of our values is integrity. So I'm thinking real restaurants I work with here, and one of their values, and how is that seen? Well, you begin to define, what are we doing? What are we saying yes to, and what are we saying no to? So integrity is like working with really, in this case, really local, small scale suppliers, paying a good price for them. Integrity is for this place, not mucking around with the ingredients too much, letting them speak for themselves. Integrity is transparent communication and the way we manage people, so sharing information about the company. So you literally begin to kind of, from that value, think, if we were to see this in a film right now, what would we be seeing happening? What would we be hearing happening? And what wouldn't we be seeing and hearing happening? And just literally just to kind of play that film and start to identify from that what that word, whatever it is, integrity, actually means when it's played out in practice. Yeah.
That's super interesting. And I was thinking about somebody that I talked with the other day. And it was a personal conversation. He has a challenge and he has behavioral challenge. He thinks that people are not living the culture like he wants it to happen. And he was quite convinced you couldn't change that. What is your view on that when CEO says, well, that's how it is, they will not change? And is there a way to get, because it started probably well intended, the whole thing, culture was doing the right thing, then it grows the business, and then suddenly the behaviors are not intact with what we are really good at and what we want to scale. Can you change behaviors again? Because that's often what I hear. Many say, this is hard, it's too difficult. And then they start to talk about all these complex change management theories where I said, no, it's not that. That's not that hard.
Yeah. I think feedback is the key here, one of the keys. And from the beginning, once you've kind of got a culture that you want to build, like, you have to feedback on what you're seeing and what you're not seeing. You have to role model it yourself.
Yeah.
You also have to feedback, and actually some of the more difficult bits of feedback I suppose I've seen in companies are when some of the senior leaders are not role modeling that behavior, and them holding each other to account and feeding back to each other. And I've been through that process with companies and senior leaders of beginning to have more honest conversations with each other when someone on the team is not actually role modeling the culture of the company properly. So I think feedback is really important at all levels. And feedback is also positive feedback. So, positively reinforcing through recognition, through praise, through highlighting people doing a good job, where you're seeing the positive, where you're seeing the behaviors being played out as you want them to be. So I always talk about, there's a 5-to-1 ratio. This comes from the Gottman Institute into relationships and successful relationships. But every relationship, which is what we have at work, as well as in life, needs 5 positives for every constructive or every negative. So really upping positive feedback on behaviors And that is kind of positive feedback, but also, like we say, recognition and thanks for people when they're doing things right. And it's that kind of positive reinforcement that can also really help. So that's one thing I'd say to your friends, is how much is happening.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. I also call them bright spots, and I think I got that from a book called Shift. I read a year ago or something, where they talk about if you want to make change, you need to go and find where people are already doing what you want to see happen. And then praise that behavior instead of focusing on all the things that's going wrong, because often in leadership, you are there to close the gaps, and you focus so much on closing the gaps, you forget praising the right things, so the right thing doesn't grow. You're not pouring water on it, you are actually neglecting it, and then you're just focusing on all the negative stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see this so much, that as human beings, we do this, and especially if we are the kind of the founder of the culture, and then we're seeing it not quite happening, we're going to really fixate on those moments where it's not happening. But like you say, watering the areas where it is a really powerful thing.
Yeah, and you almost need, as a founder, that's what I've learned myself, both being, employed in to be a leader of a business after the founders were stepping back and had them running in all the time. And I said, no, there is a problem there, but let's not focusing on that behavior. Let's focusing on the right thing. So you have that counterintuitive dilemma all the time, because it's totally normal. You want to go and fix what people are breaking. It's your thing. Your energy is driving to that. You almost need to restrain yourself if it's not something that is legally a problem. Yeah. To actually go. It's a bit like when you tell kids they're not allowed to do anything, they're going to do it. If you praise them for when they're doing the thing you want to do, they're more likely to do it again, like mopping up the floor when they spill on it.
Yeah, I think it's a very real problem for leaders, is knowing kind of how much to pick up on things and where to pick up on things, and getting too drawn into too much of that kind of corrective stuff isn't always useful. Although we need some of it. I always encourage people just to pick maybe 3 non-negotiables and really focus on those, and really kind of limit your feedback to those areas. And if in a way, it's quite easy if you've got 3 cultural values.
Yeah.
Non-negotiables. And that's where you should be giving feedback. And anything that's not really part of that, maybe we have to learn to park things a little bit as well, because not everything is going to be exactly perfect and how we want it all the time. Yeah.
And that's just remind me, Madeleine, I interviewed Tom Barton, I think it was 2021, and he talked about, we have this word standing over the door, it's called honest.
Remember?
So you have to be honest in what you do, and the feedback you give, as then, if there's not honest what's happening, you need to go and give feedback. If it's not really, challenging that, then it might can wait, because we can't follow up on everything, because people also get exhausted by the constant following up, because there's a lot of that in hospitality, following up, and that can almost become too much. So you don't give people the space to deliver the experience. I think that was where he came from. And we're very lucky. He said, we have a very strong word over our door. We need to live up to that. So if it's breaking that, we need to address it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, that's great. He's just got 1 non-negotiable. How nice and simple. And it just bring it down to, I would say, never more than 3. I'm all about less is more, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, because also you can't remember them in the moment or in the battle, which it is sometime out there. What is I also wanted to see if you could, you talked about the leaders a couple of times and the quality of them. Can you talk a bit about when this is going really well? Because I guess that, if you get the story bit right, or what we're really good at, you get the values right, and then you start having initiatives that filter out in the culture. But what is then when leader gets this really right and they're really good at this, cultivating the culture, if we use that. What are they doing? What is it that make them stand out? Because there is people that's good at it, but I think there's still more we need more of those because we don't have enough. Because if we were really great at that, we would have lots of great workplaces, especially in hospitality. And then we might commercially also look a bit different.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, it's a big question, and I don't think there's one simple answer. I wish there was. But in a way, I think there is room for many different types of leader and styles of leader. But I suppose a few traits I've seen in the leaders who I've worked with who are really embedding a positive culture. I mean, I think of Will Beckett, actually, the CEO of Hawksmoor, who, I work with very closely. And he is someone who I see as someone who has really embedded a culture, and it's through his leadership. And I think he is good at articulating the culture, and being able to talk about it, but in a very tangible way that makes sense to people.
Yeah.
And being able to really communicate. And it does begin with a bit of work of really kind of defining what it is you believe in, and then making a compelling story from it, and doing that frequently, coming and, I don't know whether it's meeting new staff at inductions or through whatever, if you have some kind of town hall thing, it all depends on your scale, but really being visible that way and frequently coming back to telling that story of your culture. I think that is a really, really, really powerful tool, but in a way where you're being relatable to people and you can tap into what makes them tick a little bit. That's one thing I think that really stands out about good leaders of a culture.
I think that's really interesting. Become like a founder, leader of a business, you often are very focusing on the product market fit and be able to talk about the problem you're solving and the service or solutions or the hospitality solutions you are delivering. But actually, I totally agree with you. Often you don't see that there's put the same emphasis and energy in articulating the culture that's needed to deliver that. Because and that was just like a reflection I made. I don't have the deep answer, but it's just like, that's like an insight moment for me there. And I think when you start doing that work on your values, your cultures, that's when, and you can connect them with the commercials bit, that's where it becomes really, really powerful.
Yeah. And it's not easy. I totally agree. And I can see, I'm very fixated on culture. So that's a bit of a shift for me to think, oh, right, people are thinking about something else. But of course, you're thinking about your product and your business. And but keep time aside to also be talking about your culture and just, and at a very practical level, finding the ways, what are the ways you're going to do that? So is it going along to inductions? Is it coming into meetings and talking about stuff, but just finding the forums for where you are going to talk and how you're going to talk about it, and making that a regular bit of your work, and done right, that can be really inspiring for people,
It's quite interesting, some of the guests I've had on the show, and there's a couple of things that pops up. So one of the things is that they have actually tried to write down not just what their culture is, but actually the journey to understand that culture. So they've written books about it. And as I say, it's a big toll to go and write a book, but you can just write for yourself for clarity as a leader. I write a lot of stuff that never see the daylight, but it's all about, for me, clarity. It's not about it has a specific purpose of something I need to sell or something I need to do. It's just something I write for the sake of it, or talk about it, talk into a microphone, record what you say. And actually thereby they get clear about it. And there was an example of Ari Weinzweig from Singerman's. He came up as he found out he was doing a thing very often. He went to a restaurant and he walked around with a jug of water and poured water in the glass to the customer. And he called it leading by pouring water. And he found out that was one of those most powerful leadership tools. But that was because he was reflecting about it. And then when he found out, this is how I show up. And I can talk about the culture, because there's a service intervention, and often was when this went really well. So he went and said, oh, well, the food was amazing. Thank you, kitchen. But then when there was a gap as well, he could easily, as you said, 5 positive, 1 negative, go out there. And he never got that insight if he didn't go out to the customers, put water. The employees were so impressed that a man that was running a £50 million or $1 million company had the time to come in evenings and pour water. And he tried to do that every evening, and he's in town. And just like, That's a commitment, but that's how he regulates the culture.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to find some way to stay connected to that end product.
Yeah.
And yeah, in hospitality, in some ways, it's awfully simple. That end product is very often just, to make your guests happy, to, like you say with Danny Meyer, to leave them feeling a bit better than when they walked into your restaurant. It's both simple and yet quite hard to achieve, but I think you have to find some way to do that. And whether that is conversations you're having or being on the floor or being in your restaurant and watching the end product, that is just, it's easy to lose sight of that.
What is the one advice you would give a new leader, manager that starts out? Because having an existing culture is a different question and a much more complex one. But like, I'm starting out, I'm building my business, and I want to get the culture right. Where should they start?
Yeah. I think I would start with, culture can just end up on paper. And I'm assuming at this stage, you've got something on paper. It's about, I think of it like DNA and transmission. So like, how are you actually going to transmit this? You've got these ideas. How are you going to transmit it? And just thinking of what your tools are, and a few clues, just so we don't have to keep all this secret. But cultural transmission is often done through training, role modeling and feedback, communication, and just finding what are the tools you're going to use to get these messages out there. And it's both the story of your culture, but also it's like that distinction between telling and showing. You tell the culture through certain things and what you say and how you talk about your values, but you also show your culture just in how you work together and the behaviors. But yeah, I would ask them just to define, how are we going to transmit this culture? What will happen over a week, over a month in our place of work that is going to actively transmit that culture?
I think that's really, really interesting. Also decide on that thing. And of course, you need to experiment. You need to try out if it works. And you will then find your 1, 2, no more than 3 things you can go and do every day to bring life to that culture and scale it. Is there any books you would recommend them to read? We know how many books there's out there. If I put culture into my Google Chrome browser or Amazon now, I will get so many books. I maybe don't know what is like the top 1 or 2 books I should go and read.
I think the one that really still for me defines culture and hospitality is Setting the Table by Danny Meyer. To me, that's like the Bible.
Yeah.
And alongside that, Unreasonable Hospitality from his protege, Will Guadera, I believe I'm saying that right. I've got to do a plug for my book, Leading from the Heart, which is co-authored with different people from different industries, but it's all about bringing compassionate, heartfelt leadership into hospitality, where we're really treating our employees in the same way as we're treating our guests, really thinking about how we welcome them and make them feel special. Those are my starting points with a shameless plug for my book.
No, and I think it's really good you got that in there, because I actually had a note here saying, now, what about your book? Because actually, leading from the heart, that's the principle of culture is. Yeah. And I think that was a brilliant title. And I think what's really interesting with that book is that you say there's like other perspectives as well, because we can learn a lot of, I think it's really interesting. I interviewed Thomas Coble from the Shoom not so long ago, and he talked about actually they're looking a lot outside the hospitality industry, find out how to elevate their culture. That means tech company, medical companies, doctors, nurses, schools, wherever where they can get inspired by small nuggets about where to do. So there is stories from outside hospitality as well. And that's what I thought was also good about the book you are involved in. There's so many angles on what it means to lead with the heart.
Yeah. And I think a moment of pride for the hospitality industry is those industries can learn from us as well. We're really qualified to build good cultures in hospitality, because when we're working at our best, we know how to make people happy. And in a way, that's what a good culture is. It is about building happy employees. And we know how to make people happy because this is what we do with our guests. So actually, there are some brilliant hospitality companies, and you've mentioned a few of them today, who've really kind of nailed this. It's not to say everything's perfect there all the time.
No.
But they really have taken that leading from the heart, that treating their employees in a way that's going to make them feel invested in, make them feel special. They've taken that philosophy and really embedded it into their cultures. So I think other industries have stuff to learn from us as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And it's quite interesting. Probably lots of people knows about Southwest Airlines. Mm-hmm. They learn a lot from hospitality businesses in the way they create their airline. They're the most profitable small airline company in the world.
Yeah.
They're not the biggest, but the most profitable in the world. And that comes from their hospitality experience aboard the plane. If you haven't flied with them, it's a very different experience than the normal transatlantic. It's like an experience, and everybody has free range to create the experience that's needed to make people feel they had an amazing trip of their life before they land, even if they only fly once with Southwest Airlines. And I went and tried to fly with them once, and it was an out of the industry norms experience. It was all good. It was safe and good fun, and lots of things happening on that flight you never will see anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of circles back, I think, to what we were talking about earlier, which was, what's unique and special about where you work? Well, what's unique and special about the hospitality industry is we know how to make people feel good.
Yeah.
And we can turn that gaze onto our employees, and we can also teach that to other industries. And actually, I've been approached by a few companies outside of hospitality looking for exactly that Southwestern Airline story of, okay, what can you help us with how we're dealing with our customers? Because you guys know all about how to look after people.
Really?
The latest one that got in touch with me was a medical firm in the States. Like, what can we learn from hospitality about our guest experience? So,
interesting. Super interesting. Again, and that's again a positive, in challenging time, we need to look for the bright spots, and hospitality has really something to offer, especially when we talk about AI. We can really make human experiences, and that's going to be the biggest other competitive leverage against technology, or hand in hand with technology, or whatever you look at it. Is there other things you are really excited about now? You just came out with the book. That's really exciting news, but there's other things going on your side that you wanted to share with the world?
On my side, not from my work that I want to share. What's coming up when you ask that is actually I'm just excited about new restaurant openings. I'm going to one on Monday. I love the fact that hospitality is a challenging industry, but there is so much life and movement, and I love kind of watching new places open and get excited about going to try new food. So that's something I'm excited about.
I don't know if there is, but is there one question you wished I asked you I didn't do? And what would it be, and what would you answer?
I think it is, what do I love about hospitality?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is the people as much as I love the food. It's kind of going back to those kids at the back of the classroom. I love how diverse the industry is, and how all these different personalities and characters who find their place in the industry, and maybe people who in some way don't always fit into other bits of life always, have found a home in hospitality. And I just think it makes it a really fun place to work, a really special place to work. And I love that feeling that it is an industry that welcomes all. Yeah, it feels so special.
Yeah, there's diversity of people you would meet if you went on your normal journey. You wouldn't meet. That's my own experience, and where it can take you as well sometimes. Really super interesting. I love that. Love that question. Where can people find you and connect with you and explore more about the work you're doing?
So I'm called The Good Life Coaching. We are a small team now, a growing team of people. And my website is thegoodlifecoaching.net. And I'm on Instagram a lot at The Good Life Coaching, or on LinkedIn, Madeleine Geach. And I'd love to meet people.
Great. We'll put those links in the show notes as well. And we'll find the article as well that you've written. Has been quite, you said yourself before we went on, there's quite big response on. I think it would be a really great place to start if you want to dive into your culture as a leader as well.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.